Wednesday, November 8th, I got to sit down with Center alum and U.S. Ambassador to Malawi, Mr. David Young. Here's our conversation.
So I graduated in 1980 and I grew up in Kansas City. I lived over on East 80th Street. And so I went to Center and studied journalism, used to be the sports editor. And then I went to Mizzou and became a journalist.
Awesome. Okay, so how had your time at Center and then your time at Mizzou, which obviously has been heralded around the country as one of the best journalism schools, how do you think that has shaped how you go about your career or went about your career?
Yeah, I think that, the skills that I learned in journalism and communication, like reporting, writing, editing, broadcasting, speaking, have been like a foundation for everything that I've done since. I graduated from Mizzou when I was 22. And over the next 5 years, I did a variety of different things. And I went on to graduate school and I studied in Ireland on a Rotary scholarship. And I worked a little as a journalist. And I actually studied theology. And I'm actually a minister, a Methodist minister too. But then when I became 27, I became a diplomat. And so I represent the U.S. at embassies all around the world.
Awesome. I was going to ask you a question about the Rotary Scholarship. So it says that you studied at Trinity College Dublin on a Rotary Scholarship, and the Rotary Scholarship is for students who wish to study peace and conflict resolution. So how do you think receiving that scholarship sort of affirmed what you were going to do with your career or what you thought you wanted to do with your career?
Yeah, I think it was really foundational because when I was in college and even here in high school, just to go back to when I was at Center, when I was 17, I had a project, an independent study that influenced my whole life. And that was like 40 years ago. And I studied for a semester about Martin Luther King and Gandhi. And I compared and contrasted them and how they worked for peace and justice. And that really influenced my whole life. And so I've lived in 12 countries around the world and visited 75. And I have taught classes on Martin Luther King in probably 10 to 15 countries. And it's really touched my heart. And my hero for my life has been Martin Luther King. So when I went to study on the Rotary Scholarship, I was really interested in studying about peace and justice, human rights for all people, human dignity and equality for all people. So that really comes even from my time at Center, and then I built on it from being at Rotary Scholar.
That's awesome. My second question is for our audience at home who may not be sure of what a diplomat does, could you sort of give like a run through of what a day as a diplomat looks like?
Sure. Yeah, being a diplomat is really fun because you get to represent the American people, you get to represent the U.S. government. I'm the ambassador of the U.S., so I run our embassy in Malawi. So we have about 500 people that work for our team, and 400 of them are Malawian and 100 are American. And Malawi is a small country in southern Africa. So you've got South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and then Malawi next to Zambia. And I've lived in Zambia and Malawi and South Africa. So I've been in that region for about 7 years. But my wife and I and our two kids, we really love Southern Africa. It's really, really awesome. When I eventually retire, I'm going to spend part of every year in Cape Town in Southern Africa and South Africa, and then part in the United States. But to your question, I'm long-winded, sorry. But your question is like, as ambassador, I'm kind of like the CEO of the embassy. So I do outreach and strategy. I do media interviews. So I talk to journalists like you. I do social media. I've done even a couple rap hip hop songs with a rapper in Malawi. But I do lots of fun things. And I get to work on kind of probably the big four issues that we work on at embassies, U.S. embassies in Africa. So we focus on peace and security, and then strengthening democracy and human rights, and helping promote economic prosperity and lifting people out of poverty, and then investing in people through health and education. So we kind of work in those four areas. So on an average day, I might start off with a class in Chichewa. I'm learning the Chichewa language of Malawi, so I speak a few words of Chichewa. And then I'll work with my teacher, tutor, and then I'll come into the embassy and lead a strategy meeting and a scheduling meeting of what we're going to do for the next 3 weeks. I'll maybe meet with the heads of the teams of USAID, which is our education health agency. and then maybe I'll go out and meet with some of the people in the Malawian government. So sometimes I meet with the president of Malawi, and sometimes the foreign minister, which is like the secretary of state, or the trade minister. And then I might come back at lunchtime and meet with some business people from Malawi or America. And then I might meet with religious leaders like pastors or imams from mosque. And then maybe in the evening, I'd go to a party or a reception or a dinner and talk about how US and Malawi can work together. And then in 2 weeks, when I go back, I'm actually going to meet with my rapper friend Suffix, and we're going to play in some more Christmas songs. So we're going to do that on you can find that on the internet.
Awesome. And like you were mentioning that you weren't always a diplomat, but you did work in Africa for 10 years, you said. And so how do you think your time in Zambia, South Africa, Sudan, Nigeria, and obviously Malawi, how do you think the shifting U.S. foreign policy under Biden and Trump and even a little bit of Obama, how do you think that has affected these African nations that you've worked in? And then also, how has the U.S.'s current policy on foreign events, especially what's happening right now in the Middle East and what's happening now in the Congo, how do you think that's sort of reinforced what you've learned under these different administrations?
Wow, you're a great journalist. Those are really good questions. Yeah, well, let me take the one about Africa first. I think I've worked the last 10 years in Africa. And frankly, if you don't mind, I'm going to talk more about Africa policy, but not other parts of the world, because I'm not an expert on Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia. So it's better if I don't talk about those, if you don't mind. But for Africa policy, I think those four big areas that I mentioned are the broad areas that we work on in all the countries where we have U.S. embassies. And there's like over 50 U.S. embassies, about 50 U.S. embassies across Africa. And, the thing I would say about Africa is, there's 1 billion people in over 50 countries. And sometimes some Americans will think like Africa's like a country. It's crazy. It's like Asia isn't a country. Europe's not a country. Latin America is not a country. Africa is not a country. Africa has 50 countries. And so what I've experienced from living in West Africa and Nigeria, which has over 200 million people, it's very, very, very diverse, like 400 languages, amazing variety of peoples, half Christian, half Muslim. And then Sudan, which is in East Africa, is so, so, so different. And then in South Africa, even Southern Africa, you have South Africa, which has, of course, still the legacy of apartheid, which impacts the country economically, especially because they've made political progress for democracy, but they still have the economic divides, largely along racial lines, which is really, really sad still. But then Malawi and Zambia are very similar, but even they are different in some ways. And like Malawi, it has a beautiful big lake, and they've grown tobacco a lot. But Zambia next door has big copper and cobalt deposits, so they have a lot of mining wealth. Well, all these different countries have different languages, different peoples, different foods. Like Nigerian food, jollof rice is really spicy. In Malawi, I've helped Maya Margaret go make fried donuts on the street, mandasi, and I've eaten the fried locusts, grasshoppers. Yeah. And so you have very different foods in different countries. And like you might, one country say, Nigeria has great music traditions, but my friend Suffix is a good rapper, hip hop artist in Malawi. But like people would know from like the Black Panther movie, Burna Boy, or Davido, or some of the other Nigerian Afrobeat artists. So the thing that I think I've learned from being in Africa for 10 years is that it's just a diverse continent. It's a beautiful continent. The population is doubling over the next 20 years. One of the big stories of the world is that the 1 billion people in Africa, by 2050, there'll be 2 billion people. It's the fastest growing part of the world, and it's going to make Africa more and more influential. Since you're a good journalist, I'm going to recommend a good article for people to read. It was in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago. And if you just go search for it, it's called Old World, Young Africa. And it's by a guy, Declan Walsh, who's a New York Times correspondent, great, great journalist. And it's really, really, really interesting because it talks about this demographic change that's going to bring young Africans into the workforce, like as IT professionals, technological innovators from Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, music impacts and other things. But at the same time, a lot of the people who don't have as many opportunities for education and health, there's going to be kind of almost a digital divide that's going to be tough for the continent. But there's great hope and promise, but also great challenge. But that's one of the real important world politics, economics developments that's going to happen in your lifetime.
And since we're kind of on the point of culture and big cultural shifts and demographic shifts, how do you think us as young Americans can sort of interact with this new upcoming culture of young Africans and sort of bridge that gap? Because, like you said, Africa is so expansive. There are so many countries and so many languages and such a diverse culture. And we even have some students here from Cameroon and Nigeria who have brought over traditions and shared their customs with us. But even further, to a further extent, how do you think we can interact with culture that is across the Atlantic?
That's awesome. I mean, wow, Avery, I can just tell by the questions you're asking, you have an awareness and an interest. I think the number one important thing is to have an interest in learning. One of the skills you sometimes talk about, which is important for any job that you or anybody else, the viewers, will do in the future, is what the idea of emotional intelligence. And there's a guy, Daniel Goldman, who wrote a book on emotional intelligence years ago. And it says that it's not only intellectual head intelligence, but it's heart intelligence. And one of the skills that's really, really important is active listening. So like you're doing, and I'm trying to do too, it's like you ask questions, but you really listen and you're trying to understand. It's like, oh, you don't think of your next question. You think of listening to what the person's saying and you really understand. Well, what we need to do with different cultures is really listen. So like you have students here who are from Nigeria, from Cameroon, like students might be Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, from different parts of amazing country of Nigeria. Well, have lunch with them, invite them to your house, listen to them, read the great novels. Like you probably read Chimamanda, Americana or something, read books, read widely, watch videos, learn about countries. When you have a chance to travel, like, in the future, I don't know if you've been able to travel to Africa before, but in the future, it'd be amazing to go to Southern Africa, West Africa, East Africa, and just to have the opportunities to learn about culture and history and politics and food and economics and clothes and music. It's so amazing. And I mean, I came from Kansas City over on 80th Street, and I had never been to Africa or Latin America or Asia or the Middle East, but having the opportunity to learn about the world and go talk to people, make friends with people from 30 countries, it's like I feel very blessed, And I think, for you and other viewers, students thinking about it, just to realize it's a big world out there and it's an amazing world. And like, I really believe that our diversity in the world makes us stronger. Like the American, motto in Latin is what? E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And as a team leader and ambassador in embassies, I really believe that from our diversity, we come together in strength and unity. And there's debates about that in America today. Some people don't agree with that. But I think we're stronger in our diversity, and you make diverse teams, you make a diverse world that can be stronger, more peaceful, more prosperous, with more amazing technological changes for good. And I think that comes from the diversity. So, during your lifetime, because I see you're really a curious person, and I can hear from your questions, you ask great questions, but being interested in the world is so enriching. It's like you'll get more from it than you give.
Thank you. That was a great answer. My final question, I'm going to round it off with this conversation we're having about empathy and emotional IQ, and I'm hoping for a world where the West is being able to like use this empathy, especially among the younger generations, to promote sort of like this political unity where we can uplift countries that may not necessarily have the same platform we do here. And so how do you think us as a generation of future voters weaponize this empathy almost to make changes in our foreign policy, to make changes in nations across the world, to have a better, more caring, more thoughtful world?
That's an amazing question. It's an interesting metaphor you use, the weapon of empathy. Yeah. That's an interesting word. I'll say that. I haven't heard that one before, but I would say that using empathy and active listening and compassion, and like I found being a diplomat, and I forget if I said, but I'm a minister too. So I'm a Methodist minister. I'm ordained too. And I did that from going to seminary and studied Martin Luther King before I went to be a diplomat. But I think the thing I learned from when I was 17 and in my church and from my parents and my family and my teachers and my mentors here at Center is empathy. And I think that's the most valuable thing you can have to be a good human being. Because if you respect people and you recognize that everybody has equal human dignity in life and that there's a brotherhood, sisterhood of all of us, if you believe that and you actualize that, you put that into practice, that's the ultimate superpower. I mean, that is like Wakanda forever, amazing superpower. Because if you have empathy for other people, that's profound. And like, I mean, I'm sure people have no idea what my job is and probably never heard of an ambassador before. But you can see it on some funny shows on TV, like The Diplomat and stuff. But that's all Hollywood. But or Madam Secretary used to run about the Secretary of State. But it's interesting though. The thing that I found, if I can say it, that's my superpower is empathy, because I believe in the equality of all people and I try to walk my talk. And when I'm in Malawi, it sounds kind of arrogant, but I'll say it anyway. But people call me the people's ambassador. And it's like the best compliment I've ever gotten in my life, practically, of my job, because it means that I'm empathetic and I'll go make fried donuts on the street with my Margaret. I'll hang out with the creatives. I'll talk to the farmers and the fishermen and women and others. And when you respect people, and I've been to mosques, I go to churches, I talk to groups, I meet with students. And when you show empathy, it's a superpower. I really believe that. So as you go forward to study more and work hard and have all the amazing opportunities you're going to have as a young leader, I would just say having empathy is a superpower. My last comment to your question about voters and Americans, I think we need to listen better, because I don't think we have good empathy sometimes, and we don't listen to others. We have our own narratives, our own stories, and whatever background, Like if I only listen to my own story as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant straight guy married with 2 kids from Kansas City, if I only listened to my story, I would have a very narrow perspective on the world. But when I have Yoruba friends from Nigeria and Vietnamese Buddhist friends from Vietnam and, Panamanian friends that I bonded with years ago, I have a bigger, better world. And I've grown. My heart has grown. It's like the Grinch, my heart has grown many sizes. And I think when you do that, that makes life more rewarding and worth living.
Thank you so much for your message of inspiration and unity, Mr. Young. It was great speaking with you, and yeah.
Thanks so much.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really an honor.
Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Dashing through the snow on a one-horse open